Welcome to another Beacon demonstration video. Today I'll be taking you through how to add a new stock item into your system. Now, if you have a head office, if you're part of an MSO, it's done through the head office level and that will flow down to the back offices at your branches and then the point of sales. But if you were part of a standalone store where you just have a back office only and a POS only, or multiple POS, it's all done through the back office. So that being said, what we do is we've got our brand new item. This is an example item I've got with me here, and I'm going to go to stock up the top, stock maintenance, and add. So the very first field it says is product code. Now this is a alphanumeric only field, which means you can only put in alphabetical characters or numeric characters. You can't do things like spaces, so we have to type in a code of some kind. Now what Beacon support tend to recommend usually is if you can't think of a code of your own, you can just use either the full barcode or the last 6 digits. So to make it simple, I'm just going to pick those last 6 digits of the barcode there and type them in. I've typed in the last 6 digits. Now, it's not going to matter that the barcode is not complete because I'm actually going to add it in later on up the top there in the barcode field. So that's my product code. The next thing is the description. So the description is a 40 character maximum space where you can type in the full description of the item that you're selling there. So I tend to recommend usually the brand of the product, the flavor or variety, and then the size. So I'm going to type in. Now you'll notice underneath it, the short description field has cut off at 16 characters, and basically it's a shortened version of this description. It's meant for the POS receipts that come out because they have a limit of how many characters they can fit on the docket paper. So you can either leave it as is, as it's shortened it for you, or you can override it and type in your own thing. So I might type in and say, like so. So the next thing is the subgroup. Now you'll notice a lot of the stock maintenance screen is grayed out at the moment. That's because we need to define our subgroup. So if I click on the subgroup field, and we've got all these different categories to pick from. So the category I'm going to try and look up is for gum. It looks like it has found this group for gum and mint. So that's perfect, exactly what I want. And also just above it there, I'll point out to you, you've got the InRange options. When you're adding a brand new item, it's not so important to change this. It's more when you've got items in future, when you want to hide them. So if you're part of a standalone store or head office and you want to hide this item because maybe it's no longer valid, maybe it's been discontinued and you've got a certain amount of stock that you want to sell, you can change it from InRange, which means completely visible, to not in range, which means it'll discontinue the item, but it allows you to still sell whatever remaining stock you have. You can't do any new goods inwards to allow the items in. The final option there is hidden. Hidden means completely hidden. You won't be able to use it on your back office, head office, PDT, or point of sale. It's in the system, it remains in the background, but it's just not visible anymore. You can always reverse these options as well through the tools menu, through the toggle in range option. But back to this, I'm going to keep it as in range. Now underneath that, you've got this field called image file. Image file is optional. You can actually have a image that of your choice appear on the customer display screen out the front on the point of sale, but you do need to download your own images and save them into the Beacon folder, which support can show you if you would like to pursue that. But otherwise, you don't need to fill it in, you can just leave it blank. Now, directly underneath that, you've got default gross profit percentage. So at the moment, this item doesn't have a default GP, but if I was to go and change the subgroup to say I need maybe 30% gross profit percentage, that would then try and recommend that GP to this item when I go ahead and put the cost price in. We'll leave that for now. So the next thing is unit of measure. So this is whether the item is each, liters, kilograms, hours. 99% of the time, it's an each item. It's only when you're adding things in like fuel or oils where you may need to change it to liter, but even with oils and most items, it's each. So we'll leave it as that. Now the next thing is you've got quantity decimal places and it's blank, which means it'll default to 0 quantity decimal places, meaning you're selling a whole unit every time you sell an item. But once again, for things like fuel, or maybe if you're selling things like maybe a cake where you want to sell it in fractions, you can actually increase it up to 2 decimal places if need be. I'm going to leave it as 0, which will mean it just defaults as quantity decimal places of whole units. Underneath that, you've got SIRA codes. So SIRA code is the fuel body that governs fuel. So if SIRA has given you a numeric code, you can put that in there. So if I had fuel, I could say 1, but I don't have one, this is not relevant, so I'm going to leave that for now. Also, we have the bin number. So this is if you have a planogram for your store and you wanted to find perhaps the chewing gums in a certain numeric order around the store, you can say the chewing gums are located in bin number 5, but there's none, so that's okay. I'm going to leave that as blank for now. The next thing is the accounts section up the top there. Now you'll notice that they have automatically populated once I put the subgroup code in earlier. So they have adopted those general ledger codes from that subgroup that we've defined. So most of the time, unless you need to, you can just leave them as is. So I'll do that. But also underneath, you can see it says tax code 0%. Now you've got options of either 0% or 10% at this point. Also underneath it, you can see it displays the Wetstock. It's not a Wetstock, meaning it's not a fuel item. So if I had previously picked a subgroup that was a fuel Wetstock item, it would say yes this year. Okay, moving along to the right hand side, you've got the barcode section there. So I'm going to add this barcode in, and you'll notice it's an 8-digit character. Now we do support 8, 12 and 13 characters for barcode. So I'm just going to type that in. And then once I've typed it in, I'm going to press add barcode. And it's got it there. You can add multiple barcodes in as long as they're not previously used with other items. You can have multiple barcodes associated with this one stock item. You just can't add it in if it's already assigned to a different item. But also, when you're typing in your barcode, you may notice that there is options for weighted barcodes up the top there. So weighted barcodes if you have a connected deli scale where we produce custom labels for your deli item depending on the weight. Also underneath it you have things like carton barcodes. So if this is not the singular unit but perhaps a box of say 20 of them, you can type in the barcode there of the actual external packaging and tick that, and what it will do is it'll add it with this asterisk there over on the right hand side there. And then finally you do have an option also to fabricate a barcode with the random barcode. So if you click on that, it'll create a barcode. That's if you need one. If maybe say deli rolls and the item doesn't have a barcode, you can have Beacon create a barcode for you, which you can then also then print a label for afterwards. But in this case I don't have one. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that and just keep this one barcode in there. So that's our barcode. Now over to the right hand side, you see we do have options for labor item. This is for things like Beacon's Auto Pro software. So if you have an item that is labor, you can have that ticked. Same with things like outside parts, you can have that ticked as well. There's also things like EFTPOS Gift Card, which we can tick as well, or lottery item. Those are only in very minute circumstances, so we won't need to worry about that for today's example. Underneath it, there is things like kitchen options as well. So if you have one of Beacon's kitchen printers or Beacon's kitchen video displays, this is a great little section to help you define whether the item is like a hamburger, for example, where we would tick that kitchen item option, or if it was an addable thing like add bacon, add pineapple, you could tick that as well. And same thing with if you have multiple printers, you can also define which printers the items go to. There's also option for free text and auto free text as well to allow you to customly enter in text with your order when you're placing the order at the POS. Okay, so that being said, let's move over now to the left side, the SKU Data section. Now, most of the time, with I'd say 95% of your items, they are just literally the first option there, both stocked and sold, meaning that you literally stock it and then you sell it. But you can see we've got 3 other options to pick from. So the next one down, sold but not stocked, but made up of other items that are stocked, are for things like, example I said earlier, the hamburger. So you might not ever stock a hamburger because you can't stock a hamburger, but you might sell it based on the items that you do stock. So for example, you might stock burger patties, burger bun, lettuce, tomato, and you can basically, when you do that, you can define each of the components over here on the bottom side, and you can say, look up the burger patty, and you'll say it comes in a pack of 10 maybe, so I'm going to sell it for 0.1 for a quantity, and then you can add the component, and you can add each of these components in one by one to make up your hamburger. When you sell one of those hamburgers at the point of sale, what it will do is it'll then decrease each of these items by those relevant quantities. So it'll give you a more accurate stock on hand control. But going back to this item example, I'm just going to change this back. So other than that, the other 2 options we have are stocked but not sold. So just in the same example of what I said, if you have a tomato, for example, that you're using as the hamburger, you're never selling a tomato outright, but perhaps you might chop up the tomato into 10 pieces once again. So you can say it is stocked but not sold, and you can pick the supplier of the tomato. The final option I'll just explain to you as well is sold but not stocked. So it's similarly worded to the second one there, but what it's meaning is it's an item that you may sell, but you'll never stock it. So this could be things like newspapers that you sell on commission, or it could be perhaps ePay items through Beacon. You can do it as an item that you sell, but you never stock. In this case, back to my example, my chewing gum, I'm just going to go back and say stocked and sold. Also underneath it, there is the not standard job. That's only for our workshop clients, so don't worry about that. If you're not using Beacon Auto Pro, just leave that as is for now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add a supplier for this. So let's say my supplier is Gems Distributors. Now, Gems Distributors may give you an invoice, or they may give you a catalog, or on their website they'll have their actual catalog code for the items. So that's their internal code that they use on their documentation. What you can do is you can teach Beacon that catalog code so that Beacon can let you invoice that same item in with their coding rather than having to rely upon remembering what the barcode is. So if I look at my paperwork and it says catalog code is... So it's an optional field. You don't have to enter it in, but if you do want to enter it in, it's helpful for invoice entry later on. So the next thing is the list price. So this is the cost price for you in excluding GST. So once again, this would be if you know what the cost of the item is, you can type that in. It is optional. You don't have to enter it in to complete the item, but I'm going to enter it anyway. Let's say my cost of this item was $1, excluding GST. Also optional field is lead time. So lead time is the number of days it takes for you to receive the item once it's placed with the order. So if I want to, I can type it in. I'd say it's a 3-day lead time. There is also an option down below for an alternate supplier. So if I have a second supplier that may be my backup supplier, I can enter that in. Also, there is a swap suppliers function, which will just basically switch the information between those. Also, in the newer versions, you'll notice we also have now extra catalog codes as well. So this is to do with our instant invoicing. You do have the ability to have multiple catalog codes defined. Okay, now moving over to the right-hand side, we'll get into ordering. So these are optional fields, but I would recommend if you can fill them in just to help you with stock maintenance, whether it's invoice entry or any parts of PDT use, it does come in handy. So we have the first field, units per carton. So let's say, as I said before, the item comes in a pack of 20, for example. I would click on the units per carton field and type in 20. Now that doesn't mean that we're going to use that other than for perhaps invoicing. So for point of sale, the back office, you're always still dealing primarily with single units with the item itself. So it's only when it comes to a field that says cartons, that's when it will do the math for you and it will multiply that out. Now the next two fields are only if you want to use Beacon's generated orders, where it will try and estimate how many items it thinks you need to order for. So let's pretend this item has a minimum holding. I need to have at least 20 of these items on my shelf. So I'm going to say I need to have 20 in the store completely. Then if I ever dip below that, so let's say if I ever have a stock on hand of 19 or less, then what it's going to do, it's going to ask me how many would I like to reorder. So let's say in this case, I want to order 40. So if I ever dip to 19 units, it's going to basically be eligible for ordering another 40 units afterward. And then also, because I've typed in the lead time, it will use that number to determine how many days it will take to arrive in. For more information, I would recommend having a look at our ordering section. Okay, now further down, you've got the cost section. These don't have figures just yet, because once you do your first invoice into the system, it'll learn what the average cost is and the last cost. This comes more into play when you look at an item in stock maintenance inquiry instead. So I'll just briefly show you. Okay, so here's a different example just to show you on the right hand side what cost prices look like once you've had the item added in and you've done invoices against it. So you can see my item here is for a Coke 600ml. It says I've got 98 units stock on hand at the moment with no units, goods received or updated. Now on the right hand side, the three cost prices are there, and Beacon does have a hierarchy of how it determines what cost price to use when it comes to determining what your stock is worth in the system. The weighted average cost is the first preferred method that Beacon will try and use. So the average cost is the weighted average cost, which is really your stock on hand that you've received in over the numerous invoices you've entered in, and then divided by the cost of goods sold. If that doesn't exist, that means that if you've never invoiced the item in, or if the item has ever dipped into negative or zero stock on hand, the Beacon system will then put a $0 figure in there instead, and then Beacon will then try and use the next in that hierarchy, which is the last cost. So that is literally just the last item that you've invoiced in. Once again, if that has $0 because you've never invoiced the item in, the third and final method Beacon will try and use is the list price, the supplier list, which you can see over here. And that, in this case, is the third preferred one. So Beacon won't let you pick that one as the first preferred method. It'll first try and use average, then last, then list. So going back to our example that we're adding in here, we can type in a list price over here of $1, but really once we start to enter in invoices in, this will no longer be the first preferred method. It will then start to learn off average and last. So in this case, that's fine. Specific cost is also to do with our workshop, so don't worry about that. And also if the item is subject to freight charges, you can tick that item as well. One of the final steps is the PLU data section. So this is now saying how much does this item cost. So once I've typed in my list price over here of $1, you'll notice unless I've got a default GP defined up the top there, Beacon will just try and suggest the cost price as the sell price. Now, I do want to increase it. I want to say I want to make it for 30% GP on top of it. So once I type that in, now you'll notice the Inc GST and the X GST is the exact same value at this point, and that's because of my tax code. So if I want to make this item a taxable item, I would change that to taxable and just try that again. And there you go. It's not exactly 30%, and that's because it's tried to calculate it based on the nearest cents rounding. So the closest it can do is 29.0%. Then it adds the 10% GST that you've defined over here, which recommends it selling it for $1.55. You do have prices 2, 3, and 4. That was originally designed for if you have a service station, which may also connect to a restaurant, which may also connect to a bottle shop, and you have multiple prices throughout the store. But with most of our sites, they tend to just use the retail price, and you can set up things like customer contracts if that's the circumstance where you want to charge certain items at certain price. The last couple of things I'll run you through are down the very bottom there. So down the bottom, you've got copy other stock items. So if this was a brand new item I was adding in and I already had maybe previous other chewing gum flavors that were very similar to this and I just want to make minor alterations, I can use that and it will copy all the details from all the other items that I've specified except for the product code. So that's a quick way to add multiple items in. Other than that, the standard job config is only once again for our workshop setup. The regional pricing is for our head office MSO users. To see the specifics on this, please refer to our regional pricing video. Other than that, the very final things to mention are locations is for workshop, so don't worry about that if you're not part of workshop with AutoPro. The very final thing is the EFTPOS codes. Now this is important if you're part of a site that has integrations with our Ampol, BP, Shell or Wex integrations with EFTPOS. So each of those EFTPOS solutions will have a predefined code based on the EFTPOS solution you've got. So if you are a site that uses BP RETs, for example, for the integrated BP, you'd have to pick one of the categories that item belongs to. So chewing gum would be a shop item in this case, so I'm happy to leave it as the default number 13, but you can see there are categories there for certain types of items. So for fuel, there's predefined items, but there's also things like workshop, oils, so forth. The next one down is for if you are part of an Ampol site. So you'll see we've got different kinds of categories there, and this is all once again based on their requirements. The third one from there is the Turbo Plus. So this is for Shell sites with Shell integration. A bit more categories under this type of EFTPOS. The final one, Quest code, is meant for Wex. So if you have the Wex integration, you just need to pick the relevant category for that item. So depending on if you have one or more of these EFTPOS solutions at your store or your branches, this is where you need to make sure you've selected the correct category for that then. Once I'm ready, I just press OK to that. Again, it comes up with a prompt to say the changes will not be made until you hit OK on the main screen there. So that's OK. I'm going to press OK. And basically we're now ready to go ahead and complete the item by pressing OK. Now once you've added the item, it does take you back to this same screen again in case you want to add the next item. For now I'm all done, so I'm just going to press cancel to that down the bottom there. The last thing I'll recommend is to make sure that this item does flow to your point of sale. If you have the label printing turned on, you need to make sure you print and then delete the label afterwards. So to do that, you just have to go back to stock. If you have label printing queue enabled, if this is visible, you want to click on that. The same icon's available up the top there under that icon. So you can see there are all the descriptions. On the right hand side are all the reasons. And then you also see there's a column that says printed. So most of these at the moment are blank. In order for this item to go to the point of sale to update, we do need to actually print it and then delete it. So I'm going to go ahead and press print. The question comes up and says, do you want to export the label file? You always say yes to that question. And what it will do is it'll generate it in a report viewer format like this. So Beacon will now consider this printed. So we can now close that off. You can print it if you need to. And then now we're good to go ahead and press delete all. So I press delete all. And now it says any items that you haven't printed for will not be sent to the point of sale. So I just want to say yes to confirm I have done that. Now what it will do is it will send the new price item down as well as the new sell price to the point of sale for any of those items, including my new chewing gum. And that's the simple nature of how you add stock items into Beacon. Thanks for watching our video on how to add a stock item in through Beacon Stock Maintenance. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at support@beaconsoftware.com.au.